welcome to episode 12 of the Simply Great Relationships podcast. We're so glad that you could join us today. I'm Marina Marina, this is Meredith Silversmith, and today we are talking about how to agree to disagree. We'll be covering, is it normal to disagree with your partner? Why couples fear disagreement, how to accept a disagreement, and how to actually agree to disagree without hating each other. Yes, there is a way. I promise you.
There is.
So make sure to stay with us until the very end because we got a great bonus for you, and we'll let you know how to get it at the end.
Yep. Awesome. I love today's topic. I feel like this comes up a lot.
All the time.
With all the couples. All the time. So first question is really my favorite, I think, out of everything we're talking about today. Is it normal to disagree with your partner? Yes, it is.
Yep.
It's normal to disagree. And we are talking about more than just not seeing eye to eye on a little thing, like what do you want for dinner? We're talking about some bigger, I'm not going to use the word fundamental, but bigger issue disagreements where you just don't see it the same way. I know we've mentioned this before, but 69% of problems couples have, so disagreements, are perpetual. They will never be resolved.
You'll never agree on them.
You will never agree. 69%. The majority of things you disagree on, you will never come to agreement on. And that's in any relationship. So I feel like that statistic is extremely important because this is normal. This is so normal. It's not a sign of anything beyond we're a couple.
Yeah, exactly. And also, just when you think about it, any couple is you're two different people. You have two different histories. You have two different backgrounds. You have two different sets of experiences. You have, there's no way for you to disagree, to agree on everything.
Yeah.
And I think, disagreement adds a lot of richness and a lot of kind of room for interesting conversations and all kinds of good stuff to relationship. I wouldn't want to be married to my clone and just agree on everything.
I don't know, Marina. I don't know if that sounds so terrible. But I see what you're saying.
So, I think it only makes sense that two different people would disagree.
Yeah, for sure. So I think what we see a lot is that couples really fear this. It may not come out as fear, but we know that underneath the anger, frustration, whatever, there's a fear of disagreeing. And, we've come up with a lot of reasons why this is the case, and we want to share them with you because I'm sure you felt it. And again, to kind of normalize the experience. This is not an abnormal experience, and if you understand why you feel this fear, it's easier to make better choices when the situation comes up. So, one of the fears that I know I've noticed is the fear of the disagreement leading to a really escalated argument,
Yeah, so you start out just not agreeing on something, and then all of a sudden it's World War III in your living room because you don't quite know. I think what happens in that situation, people are really good at going from partners to lawyers.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's not about hey, let's listen to each other and learn about each other. It's hey, if you're not completely agreeing with me and 100% pulled to my side, there's something wrong with you. Yeah. And, and both people feel this way, so both of you are not feeling heard. And, it's really about, my way or the highway. And, of course, that creates a lot of tension and a fight.
Absolutely. So fear of, oh, no, here we go again. This is where it's going to lead to. Another one is fear of what does it mean if we don't agree? Right? I think we put a lot of pressure on relationships sometimes that they're supposed to be this way, or my favorite, the shoulds, right? It should be this way, it should be that way, and if it's not, what does that mean? Yeah. And I think this is probably equally as common for the couples that I see as the first one, but, we've threw down some things that we've heard and come up with, but like, if we disagree, does that mean we're not soulmates?
Yeah, and like, if we don't agree, I feel like I'm not known by you. Like this inherent vulnerability. Like if we don't agree, there's an inherent vulnerability or like weakness in our relationship.
Right. You don't see me for who I am. You don't know me. You don't understand me. Another favorite. You can't read my mind.
Yeah, like you don't just know
Yeah.
that this is how I feel and you should feel the exact same because that's how great relationships work.
Right. In great relationships, you're supposed to be able to read each other's mind. Not the case.
Nope. Not so much.
Case, unfortunately.
I think like a really big one is we aren't compatible if we don't agree. And I think I have like a little bit of a caveat here. I think when we're talking about this, we're not talking about your non-negotiables, like your true non-negotiables.
Right.
We're talking about like your everyday stuff and even bigger stuff. It's okay to not agree on it and still be fully compatible. When it comes to non-negotiables, if your non-negotiables are like completely opposite, maybe there's something, right? Like, but everything else, totally fine to disagree on and still be extremely compatible.
Absolutely. And I think some of the ultimate fears are, if we don't agree, are we going to split up? Are we not going to last? Is our relationship doomed to fail? I think a lot of these fears really come up, and that's in those small moments, and that's part of what escalates the argument, is because our fears get triggered, and then we're like, well, no. For me to not feel this fear, I need you to agree with me. And then we start, like you said, becoming lawyers and trying to blow them onto our side.
Yeah, and my favorite is when you do, like, when couples do, like, the comparison agreement. Like, if we can't agree on this small thing, how are we ever going to agree on this bigger thing? When, like, a lot of things are standalone issues. Like, you don't have to agree on small things to agree on big things. Like, they're all independent entities, kind of. But I think sometimes people really, really overinflate the value of it agreeing on some trivial thing because it means, well, if we can't agree on this trivial thing.
Right. How are we ever going to do it on the big stuff? That is a big one.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's not necessarily like a logical argument, but I think it's really ingrained in this vulnerability and fear of like, at its core, is my relationship not good because we're not agreeing?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, think about those a little bit, and, are those things that you have felt before? Is this something that's come up for you? And try to notice what are your trigger points, because they're different for everybody. And just keep that in mind as we talk further about this, because that's going to help inform how to handle it. So a big part of agreeing to disagree is acceptance. Right? So agreeing to disagree means I feel this way, you feel that way. We don't agree, and that's okay. That's really what we're talking about. So accepting that that's the case, the first way to do that is by changing your goal, right? So stop fighting the wrong battle. It's not about pulling your partner to your way of thinking. The goal is understanding.
Yeah, like this is really where you have to take that lawyer hat off and put that partner hat back on. Like, if you're going to make that your goal, you're setting yourself and your partner up for failure.
Yeah.
And of course you're going to end with frustration. Another one is like the goal is to really gain insight into why something is important to your partner. Why, and like why what's important to you is important to you. It's really about going through that learning curve as opposed to arguing, and that can add so much richness and value to your relationship, because if you're disagreeing on an issue, it means you have your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, ideas, values around it. that come from who you are as an individual, and so does your partner. If the goal is to understand and validate, you're really learning much more about each other, which brings you closer, makes your relationship more connected, more solid. And it's not about agreement. It's just about saying, like, wow, I didn't know this about you. That's great. Like, now I have this insight into this part of your world.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, it's obviously a collaborative effort to get to the understanding part. But as an individual, you play a role. You each play a role. So your goal as one part of this team is to breathe. Breathing is very important in that moment. Take a breath and say to yourself, like, accept that it's okay to disagree with your partner. Tell yourself that it's okay, rather than telling yourself, which I know is happening, oh my god, this is not okay, we're disagreeing, what does this mean, this is going to mean this is going to mean that, and like playing out all the what ifs in your head and getting really, really escalated internally.
Yeah.
You need to stop that narrative and say, this is okay, disagreeing is normal, let me try to get to a place of understanding.
There's something that you taught me that I really love that I think is a really good little, like, life hack here, which is instead of hearing your partner and then going, well, I understand, but it's the I understand, period, pause, and then go forward. It's because I think the second the but comes in, and we talked about this when we were talking about communication,
probably.
The second the but comes in, it becomes a little more adversarial.
Yeah. It's like drawing a line through everything you just said. That's what I always say. Like, anything you said before the but now doesn't matter. You've just negated it. So you really want to be careful with that.
And I think a big part of, avoiding that but is also really checking in with your urge to win. I know some people are very competitive and very, like, want to win, want to be right. Like, that's a really strong urge. But letting go of that urge in a disagreement, because, again, the goal is not to win, can really pay off.
Yeah, definitely. And the reality is, you're a partnership, right? You're married, you're in a relationship, you're together. So if one of you wins, the other one's going to lose. And if that's the case, you're both losing. Right? That's the reality. This isn't two enemies going at it. You either both win or you both lose. And, you really want to choose wisely.
And also, like, the more you kind of dig your heels in on your side and say it's my side or no side, the more you kind of make your partner do that also. It's like you get into this really nasty power struggle, and you really polarize each other. So, like, an issue you may have been this far in disagreement on, all of a sudden becomes like this far.
Yeah.
Just because you're in that power struggle, not because you actually disagree this much.
Yeah. And you know what? The way a lot of couples describe that to me, I wonder if you see the same thing. They'll come in and they'll explain it like, if I say the sky is blue, she says the sky is purple. Yes. And I say, no, look at the sky is blue. And she says, nope, the sky is purple. Like, that's this.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
It almost reminds me of, like, oppositional teenagers. You're not oppositional teenagers. You're grown adult partners who love each other. Sometimes it's really important to check in with that notion.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah.
Just for a second. So we want to give you some really specific ways to combat this and to be able to actually agree to disagree without harboring frustration and resentment. So, the first step, like we talked about a few minutes ago, is committing to understanding. Making your goal, understanding each other, understanding your partner, and being understood by your partner. And the best way to do this, if you haven't already, is to go back to episode 1 on communication and listen, but especially to download the bonus, the communication tip sheet, because it's like gold. That has our 4 or 5 main tips for communicating in a healthy way, breaks it down step by step. Like, that is your foundational information for many, if not all, of what we talk about. So that's step 1.
Another one is to make it your goal to understand why your partner's opinions are important to them. Like, think about that as something that truly enriches your relationship. If you want to understand, like, why something matters to your partner, you're actually taking the time to, like, say, I want to come in, right? As opposed to attempting to persuade them. So it's like letting go of that urge to persuade and being lovingly curious, which is, again, something we talk about in the communication tip sheet and in episode 1. So really getting into that space of, I am lovingly curious. I'm not a lawyer who's here to persuade you that I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah.
It's more like, tell me why this is important to you. I really want to know this part of you.
Definitely. And then, you know, as you gain more understanding and you're talking through it in a constructive way, you want to look for commonalities rather than where you differ. You want to look for areas that you have in common on that topic. You know, search for them. They're there. Even if they're small, they do exist. If you find the ones that are small, you can try to expand on them. So a really helpful episode for this piece is episode 6 on compromise. And there's also a really good freebie with that one too, the compromise cheat sheet that takes you step by step through this process. So you go through the talking through it, understanding one another more deeply, and then working on compromise. And compromise doesn't always mean there's a solid solution to the problem. Sometimes compromise just means agreeing to how we're going to manage our disagreement. You know? Yeah.
Definitely. Again, I think that goes back to how we started, that 69% of problems you're not gonna solve. So it's more about, compromise is more about, like, let's improve our quality of life around this thing, as opposed to, like, again, let's be lawyers and look for a clear-cut solution here.
Yeah.
Again, we don't want you to just listen. We want you to listen and integrate. So we've created a roadmap for from disagreement to acceptance. This has some really great self-explorations and questions to consider. And you can get it on our website at simplygreatrelationships.com/012. So let's talk takeaways.
Let's talk takeaways. I think my biggest takeaway is just around the fears that come up for people when you disagree with your partner. Like, that it's not just like, well, I want you to agree with me just because. It's a lot deeper than that. And I think that from on the other person's end, like, when you see your partner disagreeing and digging in their heels, we don't feel that empathy. Right? We don't feel like, oh, they're really hurting right now, or they're really fearful right now. We feel like, oh my God, why are they acting like that, right? So keeping in mind the fear-based place that action is coming from, I think is really significant. What about for you?
My big takeaway is, and you say this a lot, and I love it, and it's always my takeaway, is, like, when you say but, you're striking out everything that's come before it. And, you know, even though your intentions may be good, you're really turning things adversarial when you throw that I understand but. So for me, it's like, don't do the work and then strike it out. That's my big takeaway from today.
Absolutely. So that's all for today. You know, as always, we hope you take these tips and start using them right away. Definitely download the freebie because that's going to be really helpful. We'd love to continue the conversation with you in our Facebook group. We'll be hooking you up with tips, tricks, and live streams exclusively for our members. You can find the group at facebook.com/groups/ www.simplygreatrelationships, or you can click the link on our website, simplygreatrelationships.com. Till next week. Bye.
Bye.